Welcome to Under Heaven, the podcast where we glorify God and celebrate the beautiful stories of women whose lives have been transformed by His goodness and grace. I'm your host, Trish, and each week we share real conversations about faith, hope, and purpose. This is a place for encouragement and truth, where every story matters and every listener is welcome. No matter where you are in your journey, let's grow together under heaven. Welcome to Under Heaven podcast. Today we have an amazing guest, which they all are. I know I say that every time, don't I? We have a guest who has a very interesting fact about herself, which she's going to share. She is a mindset coach and a psychotherapist, and she has been helping women for over 30 years. And most of these women have a hard time breaking free from self-doubt, overthinking, and worrying what others think of themselves. Now, do we ever worry about that, ladies? Let's welcome Elaine. But Elaine, the first thing, other than hello, I want you to tell me about that special thing that you did at the age of 42.
Right. So, hi, everybody. I'm Elaine Belson. I am a licensed clinical social worker. And at the age of 42, I became a social work officer for the Army. So, I joined the Army at the age of 42.
Wow. How was that? Did you just go in being, being part of the medical staff or the part of that staff, or
Yeah.
did you have to do like training and stuff too?
Well, we do. They have special training for medical officers.
Oh,
So we they call it Officer Basic Leadership Course, or OBLC for short. And so we get our own sort of version of boot camp. It's not the rigorous type of boot camp that most people think of, but we did go out into the field, and we went so we had to camp in tents for 2 weeks, and did all kinds of different exercises. Like, we were in a striker tank. They call them strikers, and they have this contraption that makes the striker go upside down so that you can
oh
see what
my.
it feels like to if you're in a tank and the tank gets goes over an explosive device, and you get rolled over, and how do you deal with that? And we had to walk through some wooded areas looking for potential um, you know uh, land, what we call them EODs, or explosive ordnance devices, anything that might be laying in the ground that we might trip. We did some land navigation where they give us basically a compass and a map and some map coordinates, and we had to find different little like sites in different places, where it's just sort of like a post or something in the middle of a wooded area. We have to find it. And We had to go to a mock building where we do like a raid. We have our AK-47s, whatever, we have rifles, and we are in a team of four, and we have to carry out an exercise like we are raiding a building that might have, someone inside that is a terrorist or something like that. So those are some of the things that we learn to do, familiarize ourselves with. And everyone is considered a warrior because there is no front line anymore, right? It can happen anywhere. Someone can be targeted anywhere. So that's one of the reasons why we have to familiarize ourselves with those things.
Amazing. That's wonderful. Now, would you have children? How were you getting at 42? Where were you in life?
It's a good question. So I did. I had a daughter who was about 5 years old at the time, and that was very hard because I ended up getting. Now they came with me. I got stationed in North Carolina at Fort Bragg, and they
Okay.
came with me there, and we kept our house, and then we rented on the base on Fort Bragg, and then when I got deployed, though, that was hard because then I was away from my daughter, and they moved back home, and I was in Afghanistan. So I remember that first month was the hardest. And I can remember just staring at my daughter's picture and sobbing and just feeling so guilty that I left her.
Oh. How long were you gone then? How long were you overseas?
6 months.
Oh my. Yes. Well, hats off to you and thank you for what you've done anyway, being a part of our military force. Okay, so even before you went there, you worked with women, even before you went into that.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah,
Tell us
before
a
and
little
after.
bit,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about being a mindset coach, what you do, and just a little bit about yourself in that field, please.
Okay. Well, my background is as a clinical social worker. So I've learned that, kind of like a primary care, a physician, right? We are generalists. We have to be prepared to help people with a whole variety of different issues, could be anxiety, depression, stress, grief, anger management, communication issues, parenting issues, work-related issues, right? Um, but passion of mine is helping women who are hard on themselves. And I always say that that's, you know, whenever I hear that from a woman, I'm really hard on myself. I say, yeah, you and every other person with two X chromosomes, right? So that's very common. And helping them to overcome, like you said, basically imposter syndrome, people pleasing, and perfectionism so that they can live lives according to their values and not their fears.
And approximately how long and I'm sure it varies. If you are working with a woman who has really low self-esteem and that, how long does it usually take for you to work with her? Is
It
there like,
depends. And yeah, it
yeah.
depends on what other issues we're dealing with. But it can be a couple of months to a year, right? It depends on what other issues that might be contributing to it. Like a lot of people have grown up with trauma in their lives, and that contributed to where some of those self-esteem issues are coming from, and some of the negative messages that they have been feeding themselves for many, many years. So,
So you have to kind of go through the trauma, get her delivered from all that trauma, and then go into the mindset for her.
yeah, well, I
Is it?
think they kind of go in tandem.
They go
Yeah,
together.
yeah. What you're looking at is what we call the presenting problem, whatever it is that the person comes in with, and then, looking at where is that coming from, right? And I find that when it comes to the whole, negative thinking, being hard on yourself, that it's a combination of things. So, some of it is cultural, I'm sure you are familiar with in your work. Some of I think some of the messages that women get, you know, culturally, I think a lot of women are very relationship oriented, and so I think that they have that's been reinforced by some of the roles that we've been allowed to play over the years. I think traditionally or historically, women have been put in certain roles that are very caretaking type of roles, like nurse or secretary or teacher, and of course, mom, of course. And so I think that, between being relationship oriented and some of the cultural factors, and so then you look at that, and then you also look at, what kind of messages did they receive growing up? And it doesn't necessarily even have to be trauma per se, but one of the concepts in my field is something called mirroring, which is starts with parents and how they respond to their children. So, if a girl, let's say she falls off her bike and she comes running home to her mom and she says, "Mommy, I fell off my bike." And mom says, "Well, you should be more careful next time." Not earth-shatteringly inappropriate, but compare that to, "Well, that's okay. Everyone falls off their bike sometimes, but I know you're a great bike rider and you'll get back on and you'll do great." Now, if you compare those messages over a period of time and they take that first message and multiply that exponentially through a child's life, what kind of mirroring is that child getting? In other words, what kind of feedback is that child getting about herself? And so those are, some of the different factors that we look into in terms of where it's all coming from.
And like, how do you address it? Do you begin like by asking them their history, or um, how do you begin when a woman comes in and is just a basket case? Where do you start? Probably
Um,
not your favorite client, but we're there.
Um, well, it's such a passion of mine and it's so common, that really what I start doing is I start normalizing a lot of what they're reporting, what they're experiencing, you know. Um, like the expression of, I'm really hard on myself, or I have a hard time saying no, um, or I, uh, I have a hard time, or I'm just really hard on myself. I mean, these are some of the different, I'm not hard on myself. I just said that. But I worry about what other people think. And so those are, some of the messages that I get, and I start by normalizing those because I hear those so much from women. And then what we try to do is I try to explain where some of that is coming from. So, for example, one of the things that I do is categorize a lot of that into what I call overthinking. So, um, whether or not it's mind reading, second guessing, comparing yourself to others, anticipating other people's reactions, over analyzing, or self criticizing. All of those things I put into the category of overthinking, right? And what I do is I explain to women that this is all chocolate cake.
Ooh, tell us, how is that?
And so the reason why I say that is because, sometimes when we're upset, we might reach for chocolate cake and as a way of coping. And so that's what overthinking really is it's just like chocolate cake. It's something that might make us feel like better in the moment. It might make us to feel like we're more in control of the situation, but we're not really doing anything to improve the situation. So yeah. So so I help people to realize, or women, to realize that it's really overthinking is really just a way of trying to cope with uncomfortable feelings. And so then we start learning to replace overthinking with some other strategies like emotional intelligence, setting boundaries, and self-validation.
Now, something that I hear a lot when women come to me is they don't know how to set boundaries.
Hmm.
What do you suggest? And that's all part of them realizing who they are, the importance of them setting boundaries, or how do you address that?
Right. So one of the things that I hear a lot from women in so many words is they say, if I set boundaries, and assert myself, it's going to, quote, make things worse, right? In other words,
Yeah.
either the person will be upset with me or something won't get done. And I will usually say, yeah, you're right. That's probably true. It might make things worse. But that's because the other person can't handle you setting boundaries and asserting yourself, right? And so the problem isn't you, the problem is them, right? And you're not responsible for the fact that they can't handle you setting boundaries and asserting yourself. In fact, when we do that, when we do take responsibility and we overcompensate, by doing it ourselves or not setting those boundaries because we know somebody else will get upset, then what we're doing is, ladies, we are enabling, right?
Yes.
And I know that women know what that is. And so basically what's happening is you're not only doing yourself a disservice, but you're also doing disservice to those around you because they're not learning how to handle either how to cope with their emotions or how to problem solve or how to do whatever it is that they're not doing, if it's a certain task or errand or chore, right? So we're not doing them any favors either. And you might even call it tough love, right? Which is what I call saying no in a loving way. It's saying, no, don't ask me to do something that's not in your best interest, right? And it's kind of hard to get angry with that.
That's something. And it makes me think of the divorce. I don't know if there's a correlation between if the woman has enabled her spouse and by doing things when the spouse doesn't do it, does that have a
Yeah,
lot to do with why there's so many marriage breakups, do you believe? They get to that point where, or is there a good way to handle that?
that's a really good question, Trish. I do think that a lot of women reach a point, where I say there's a point of no return. And oftentimes I'll have women that come to me and we will talk about marital issues, and then they have a hard time getting their spouse to come into the therapy with them. And what I'll tell men is that eventually it's going to get to a point where this is what I hear happens a lot is, the woman wants the spouse to come to marital counseling and they say no. And then eventually she gets to a point where she's just done. And then suddenly, the spouse is like, oh, let's go to marital counseling. And by that point, it's too late. So I've seen that happen. And so that's why I say that's a really good question. I do think that there's a point where women, if we keep just ignoring our own needs, we will get to a point where we're just so resentful of it. And I also think that it gets to a point where if the spouse is not responsive to that, then, what that's telling the the wife is that you're not open to changing. And then it gets to a point where it's like it's not a matter of um, even resentment or um, uh, vindictiveness. It's just a matter of, I can't continue to live this way. I'm just being transparent with you. If things don't change, I cannot continue to live this way.
I see why they used to do marriage counseling for young people who are planning on getting married. So
Hmm.
important.
It
Oh,
is. I think the
because
biggest thing is communication.
between the spouse and spouses.
Oh, absolutely. I have what I created was this uh, a method model. It's called 16 Principles of Communication. And it's something that I came up with on my own just from years of working with couples and families.
Uh, is that available in a book, or is that only if they're working with you?
Yeah, just generally working with me. Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Well, you know what? While we're at this point right here, would you give your information of how someone could reach you if they would like to talk with you about what's going on with them?
absolutely. So, best way to reach me is through my website, which is ditchyourinnerbully.com.
Ditchyourinnerbully.com. Wow, I
Yep,
love that.
right. And on there,
Okay.
I have two free guides, which are which talk about, there's different statements. One of is called say something, say it this way. And so basically it's about presenting alternative ways of talking to yourself, you know.
Okay.
And yeah,
That's wonderful. And I know some women, I will definitely give them your website because that's something I'm not real good at helping women with that kind of stuff. I did psychology, but I don't do the stuff you do. And I just think that's amazing how you can see the whys of why we do things, you know.
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
I have an expression, I have a lot of expressions. One of them is if information and reason were enough to change minds, people would never speed on the highway or eat junk food. In other words, we have the information, we have the knowledge, we know why it's important, why we should be doing things a certain way. So why don't we do them? And that's where human nature comes into play, right? If we don't understand the psychology behind people's behavior, right, they're not going to change.
And that's why I have so many women coming to me, like you said, the why. I know what to do, why don't I do it? And
Exactly. And there's good
yeah, that's what
reasons
I
for
need.
that. Yep. Another one of my expressions is people have good reasons for making bad decisions.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my. Don't we? Oh, I think we all need someone like you in our life.
Thank you.
Oh, well, okay, so what is there something else you'd like to talk? I am so glad we talked to you, and we've got about 10 more minutes if you'd like to
Yeah.
talk. Um,
Yeah.
because I'm so happy you are imparting something into our listeners that many are afraid to ask or talk about. So
Yeah. Yeah. I
thank
hear
you.
that a lot. Yeah. You're welcome. Um, so I talked about the different ways in which we can counter overthinking, right? And so one of those is emotional intelligence. And remember, I said that overthinking is just a way of coping with uncomfortable feelings. So the next time you catch yourself overthinking, that is doing any one of those six things that I described, right? What you want to do is you want to stop and you want to ask yourself, first of all, what am I thinking? So labeling the feeling. Um, what is causing me to feel this way? And you want to be very specific. So let's say, for example, you have to give a presentation at work and maybe you're self-criticizing, right? Or you're anticipating other people's reactions. So you stop and you say, okay, what am I feeling about this? I'm feeling anxious. What is it that I'm afraid is going to happen? What am I feeling specifically anxious about? And it's not enough to say, well, I'm anxious because I'm going to be giving this presentation. What you want to do is you want to get specific and say, what exactly is it that I imagine is going to happen? Are people going to ask me questions that I'm not going to know the answer to? Is it that people are just going to get bored and they're going to start, looking on their phones? Am I afraid that I'm going to just lose my train of thought and just not have a brain fart and not know what to
Yes.
say next? So you want to get really specific because each one of those things would prompt a different solution.
Okay.
And that's the third piece of it. So number one, what am I feeling? Number two, what's causing it? And then the third thing is what's in my control to change the situation. So if you're afraid of having, of just losing your train of thought, practice, 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 right? If it's that you're afraid that people just get bored, well, what are some things that you can incorporate into your presentation to make it more interesting? Like maybe including the audience and asking them questions, or including a joke, or or storytelling. So depending on what the specific concern is, then when you go to what's in my control, right? You're going to come
How
up
I
with
can.
solutions, right? Because that's
Okay.
why we have emotions. Our emotions are there to help us to problem solve. Too often, what we do is we try to talk ourselves out of our feelings, right? We either avoid them or ignore them, or we try to talk ourselves out of them, tell ourselves, "Oh, I shouldn't feel this way." When in reality, what we want to do is tune into them, just like I described, and then problem solve. So that's
Wow.
part of what emotional intelligence is all about.
Now, I've heard that term emotional intelligence a lot, but
Hmm.
I've never had anyone explain what it really is. And that makes
Right,
perfect sense. If we find ourselves overthinking, first thing we need to do is stop.
right,
Take a deep breath and label that feeling. What is the feeling? And there's so many times we as women don't think about looking into ourselves. We try to problem solve with everybody else
right.
without listening to the
Hmm.
emotion and seeing what it's trying to show us.
Right,
That's great.
exactly. You just said something too about how women are always trying to help everybody else. And that kind of gets to another one of my techniques, which is self-validating. And I tell women, you already know how to validate yourself because you do it for other people all the time. What do we tell other women? We say, don't worry about what other people think. Just be yourself. You're good enough the way that you are, right? Especially when we're talking to our children, right? If we have children,
Yes.
right? Um, and so that's what self-validation is. I have two techniques. One of them is called Be Your Own Best Friend. So anytime you catch yourself going back to that overthinking, that mind reading, second guessing yourself, self-criticizing, any of those things, you want to stop and ask yourself, if I were talking to somebody that I care about, a child of mine or a friend, good friend, would I say to them the things that I'm telling myself? Right? Would I say to somebody that I care about, look, if you want to avoid rejection or failure, here's what you need to do. You need to mind read. You need to second guess yourself. You need to self-criticize, overanalyze, etc., right? We would never say that to somebody that we
Right.
care about, but these are the things that we tell ourselves. So that's being
Oh,
your own best friend is like, what would you say instead? And the reason why that works is because when we're talking to other people, we're accessing our reasoning skills and our values. When we talk to other people, it's from a place of reason and values. But when we talk to ourselves, it's from a place of fear and insecurity. So we're
wow.
getting away from that part of our brain, the emotion mind, and into the reasoning mind, the rational mind. And then the other technique of self-validation is what I call the opposite of the golden rule. I know you know what the golden rule is, right? Because that comes from the Bible. So treat others the way you want to be treated, right? So my opposite of the golden rule is you have a right to be treated the way you treat other people, right? So this is anytime somebody else is making you feel bad about yourself, then you want to stop and ask yourself, if the situation reversed, would I be talking to them the way they're talking to me? Would I be treating them the way they're treating me? And if the answer is
Very,
no, then that tells you something about them.
wow. Yes. Wow, that's amazing. You have poured so much in. Thank you so much. Because I know there are so many women out there that have these issues. And especially, if we're trying to live before others and be this strong woman, I am woman, hear me roar, we don't
Right.
take time to think what we're thinking about ourselves. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I thank you for being with us, Elaine. I know it's been a brief visit, but you have poured out so much into our listeners today and into me. I've taken 2 pages of notes while you were talking. Because that's why I took psychology in college, because it just amazes me how our brains think.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
we can all use it. It's always useful.
yeah. And I do want to encourage people to contact you looking at your website, www.ditchyourinnerbully.com. And is there a word you'd like to leave with the women today?
Okay, well, another one of my expressions is so some of you may be old enough to remember an old 70s detective show called Columbo. I don't know if you
Oh,
remember
yes.
Columbo. Yeah. So he used to walk around with a trench coat and cigar, and he was always asking a lot of questions. So I tell women when it comes to yourself, right? If you do something, you make a mistake, or you do something and you wish you had handled it differently, I want you to be like Columbo, but without the trench coat and cigar, right? I want you to ask yourself questions. Try to be compassionately curious. What was I thinking in that moment? What was I feeling? What was going on for me that day, that week, that month, that year? What about my background may have contributed to me handling it the way that I did? So, this is about being understanding of yourself rather than what we normally are, which is judgmental.
Wow. Be kind to yourself. But I love that vision. Now I'm going to be thinking
Be
of that because
understanding, right?
yes,
Mhm.
be understanding of ourselves. That understanding, I like, yes. And
Yeah.
Columbo did, oh my gosh, we went through, I don't know, last year or so. We just wanted something to watch and we don't like what's going on TV nowadays.
Yeah.
And we watched some of the Columbo and it was like, it was hilarious. And
Yeah.
yes, he, so, another thing that shows me, where you say ask yourself questions just without the trench coat and the cigar, I think that also says we can laugh at ourselves sometimes. You know,
Yep.
I laugh. When I stop and think about some of the things, it's like,
It's so
really?
true. Yep. It's so true. Yep.
Well, I love that vision. Thank you so much for that. Okay. Well, you have certainly been a pleasure to talk with today and to get to know you a little better, Elaine.
Thank
And
you,
I
Trish.
just wish you the best of all that you do and that you would just have a blessed year.
Thank you so much. And to everyone out there, I wish them the same thing.
Amen. Thank you again for being with us today. And I know this has touched you because we're all women and we all have the same feelings. We just need to learn to ask questions of ourselves and be understanding of ourselves. And call Elaine if you need more help. Okay, until next time, be sure to speak life, choose hope, and know that you are loved. Bye-bye. Bye, Elaine. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today on Under Heaven. I trust this conversation encouraged your heart and reminded you of God's faithfulness. If today's episode blessed you, please click like, subscribe, and share the hope with others. Until next time, blessings.